Well, hey everyone, we are back here in the obviously lovely hotel room for this post day 2 of the Pro Tour recap. I took a bit of a longer break before recording this than I did yesterday, just because I needed a bit more time off, and I had a beer and I had a nice big steak, and life is feeling pretty good right now. Don't worry, I wouldn't record drunk. That would be bad for everyone involved. So day 2 recap. For those of you who on the TLDR, my final score was 8-6. I finished 95th. Not as high as I would have liked, but, going 4-3 both days at the Pro Tour, tough field. There were lots of matches that came down to the wire that were very close. Again, like yesterday, there was one or two sort of very silly mistakes, which kind of showing me how much of my gameplay I need to tighten up, which is really useful. But let's just run through it. So I started off day 2 with Estavro. The game was fairly, I wouldn't say one-sided. He did hit me a fair bit, but ultimately I resolved 2 tomes of Viendal, so I gained 12 life and played 2 auras with both of them, and eventually I killed him with a Merciful Ode combination that he couldn't really deal with. That game was fairly sort of not one-sided, but certainly definitely in my favour. Every time he came in with an open hold or something like that, I managed to play something else, like a Genesis, or I think once I played an Arcline Sentinel in response to a Crippling Crush when I had a Haze Bending and a Merciful on the table, so that kind of thing is very good. My next game was against Lexi. I've never actually played Lexi with Prism before, so this was a new one for me. I went sort of heavy into the aura package and just tried to steal his arrows, but of course part of the Lexi strategy for Lightning Lexi is to ignore Prism's auras if you can and just go for face and try and kill them, which did work to an extent for him. I definitely started dropping quite quickly, especially when he had his 3 of a kind turn, which brought me down quite low, I think to 6, which is where things sort of started to get a bit ropey. However, at this point, I did have a board state, so I had an Otarath and 2 Haze Bending, so I was just looking to keep a yellow card in hand to generate the shield and then go again, and then just hit him as many times as I could, and he was on 6. So this game was actually my first judge call of the weekend. I haven't really made any judge calls before, but there was a bit of a thing. Now, I don't disagree with the judge call here, and I didn't rage about it. I was very polite to everyone involved. I thanked my opponent for being patient, just as I made sure that the ruling was completely correct. And, obviously he didn't want it to be, ruled against him. But, I was being polite and everything about it. And I even appealed it to the head judge because I did think it was a bit of an edge case. I didn't really like it. So essentially what happens is we finish the turn. So we finish his turn. I have this 2 Haze Bendings and an Ode in play. He has no Tunic, he just has New Horizon. And he's just played a Remorseless, hit me for 5. I've gone down to 1, but I haven't written down that on my notepad. I've forgotten to write down that I've gone down to 1, and he has taken me down to 1 correctly. So we go to the next turn. I attack him for 1. He blocks it with the Tunic counter, with the Tunic. And then we go into his attack. So he comes in for 5, I block that. I have a Soul Shield in hand, but I want to keep a yellow to make a shield and attack 4 times on my turn. So I block instead with Armor, Skull Cap and Tunic, thinking that I'm blocking for 3, taking 2, and still going down to 3, still being alive. So I say, as I've said many, many times during the game, block 3, so I'll take 2, right? I say it all the time, people say it. And he goes, okay, so you take 2, so you're dead. At which point I say, no, I'm on 6. He says, no, you're on 1. We sort of resolve that communication error. I realize I am on 1. So then I say, okay, so I'll play a defense reaction. My opponent says, you can't play a defense reaction. You said you take 2, so you die. Okay, now, I perfectly understand his position. Obviously, he's just won the game. But in my position, I haven't actually taken the damage. I've acknowledged that there is damage that should be taken, and I've said I will take this much. And he's gone straight ahead and said, okay, so you're dead. technically he skipped, multiple steps after my blocking, the attack reaction step, the defense reaction step, and just jumped to me being dead, when really all I've actually done is said I've blocked, and that means I will take two. We haven't, he hasn't confirmed that he's not playing an attack reaction to buff that. I haven't confirmed that I'm not playing a defense reaction to stop it, right? So we call the judge, and essentially what the judge says is that by saying, and this is what the head judge confirmed as well, that by saying block 3, take 2, I'm essentially proposing a shortcut to my opponent whereby I will take 2 damage, right? And that it doesn't matter that the life total is misrepresented. That's on my job to maintain. So if I haven't done that, then I should lose. Now, I kind of agree, but I think that this is a point where sort of we have to really consider the language and how we're encouraging communication in Flesh and Blood. So a lot of people do just talk about damage pretty lightly and flow between the different phases of the, defense reaction, attack reaction, etc. Because, we're not in the Dorinthia meta anymore. So going, I attack, okay, any attack reactions, any defense reactions, no, okay, resolve damage. No one does that much because a lot of the popular heroes at the moment, from like Arya and Prism, etc., don't actually run attack reactions or defense or that many attack reactions at all. They just run defense reactions. A lot of people just skip straight to, I'll soul shield this, I'll think that. But it is also the thing that a lot of people just talk about damage, and there is a point there where I say block 3, so that means I take 2. That's, I'm saying I'm going down to 3, right? So I take 2 down to 3. My opponent then corrects me and says I've got the wrong life total. But that means that I'm not actually taking 2 down to 3. So there's been miscommunication, at which point priority is returned to my opponent because I have finished blocking. He needs to pass attack reactions, and I have a window to play defense reactions. I don't necessarily think, and this is something for the rules team to probably clarify, and I think it's very important for us to understand what language constitutes a shortcut in that instance. I'm not even saying that I'm necessarily wrong, and I think after talking to some of my friends, I kind of understand the judge's perspective. I'm very much just trying to claw back a win, but equally, we're in a situation where I would have just blocked it because I had a defense reaction in my hand. There's nothing that makes playing that soul shield not the way I do this. And technically, I'm already taking a penalty because I'm losing the Arc Knight, the Skull Cap, and my Tunic for a block. I need to soul shield it, so I'm blocking 9 anyway. So I would have been heavily penalized regardless. So personally, I don't necessarily agree with the way that this was handled, but I do kind of understand what he's saying in terms of my language suggested that there was a shortcut, and I already wasn't happy with the shortcut when I was dead, but or when I was going to take lethal damage. However, I will say that, from my perspective, the rules, and I think this is where it becomes important, because I was talking to people about this after the game, the rules need to encourage good communication between players, and that includes the management of shortcuts where possible. So if it isn't acceptable for me to say, block 2, that means I'll take 3, then I'm just not going to say the second half of that sentence. And every time I blocked for 3, my opponent is going to have to say exactly how much damage I'm taking. And if he gets it wrong, then that's another discussion. And my opponent is going to have to make sure they pass attack reactions and defense reactions every single time. And that's okay. I mean, that's reality, but it will slow games down a bit, whereas a bit more fluidity, I think personally, is actually encouraged at every level of the game. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is it is really, and it becomes more and more important for, I think, the rules to define what constitutes shortcut language, right? So does me say I'm blocking for 3? No, I'm not looking to add more block there in terms of blocking with cards from my hand, but I have a defense reaction. So up until the point that we reach the damage resolution step, we are in the defense reaction step, right? Where attack and defense reactions can be played. So, is me saying I'll take 3, me taking 3, or is it me saying this is how much damage I think I'm taking? Is that correct? And if I say I'll take 3 down to 3, is that sentence correct? And is that therefore enforceable? Because if I say I'll take 3 down to 3, and my opponent says you're not on 3, you're on 1, then that whole sentence is incorrect. Now, does that mean we get a window to play a defense reaction? I don't know. I'm not really going to beat up the judge on that because I think that was a perfectly legitimate way to handle the situation. And I was definitely looking for an out for my misplay. But, I was playing with imperfect information, which, does constitute an issue with the game itself. Some other people suggested I should definitely ask for a rollback, or I should have said, hey, this isn't really right. I've been playing with incorrect information. Can we roll back to the point that was relevant? But I think that's a bit tricky because I made a mistake about my own health, whereas if I had played based on the assumption of my opponent's health was incorrect and he hadn't corrected me, that would be a bit different. Anyway, that was the silly mistake I made, which cost me a game. I feel like, I don't know, like the guys who watch this, guys and girls, in fact, people, you can tell me, I think it's perfectly good. I think it's really important to talk about these silly mistakes because it's important to understand that one mistake like that is going to cost you a game at the Pro Tour. You could be playing really well. You could have 5 auras on the board and be winning in many, many ways. And, you can make one mistake and you just take lethal because although you had the complete block in your hand, you just didn't block it. Then we moved on. So round 3, we had an Oldhim. I feel really bad for Oldhim's paired into Prism. I finished the game on 32 life. I had 8 shields at one point. It was just rough. He was a more aggressive Oldhim. He did play a lot of go again. He did hit me for a bit. And also, get go again and come in with that kill auras. He killed a few auras. He had a few 2 aura kill turns, but I also got to resolve my Starver attack and resolve tomes twice. And I just went up to 32 life and played 2 auras and he couldn't recover. So that was a fairly short game. It's kind of like not a free win, but definitely not a good matchup for Oldhim. Then we went into a chain player. Now this is my fatigue strategy coming in. And the fatigue strategy was actually going kind of well. I was on 29 life going into Shackle 7, which is kind of where I want to be. I was just about to arsenal a Wartune Herald to kill Ursa, and I had my tunic counter ready to kill Ursa as well. So everything was kind of looking like it was on plan. My chain opponent had basically played a Belittle the turn before and gone to search for a Minnowism. He didn't find one, but that's not the point. The point is he shuffled his deck. And from that shuffle, his top 5 banishes were, I think it was 4 or 5 Blood Deck cards and an Eclipse. So he basically got a free Eclipse on turn 7 when I also needed to get that Wartune into Arsenal to kill the Ursa. And I really needed another turn to get that Wartune into Arsenal so I could block with whatever I drew, right? So we had a bit of a rough situation. So he took me down from, just let me remember, he took me down from 28 down to 6 on one turn, including almost all my full hand and armor blocking, which was pretty rough. I did have a sigil the next turn, so I did kill Ursa. I did go up to 6, but because he got that power turn so early, really, he still had 20 cards left in his deck, which meant that he had plenty of time at leisure to kill me, because normally the fatigue strategy requires that they attack you more spread out until that final turn, but they have a lot of blues on the final turn that make it harder for them to kill you. So I kind of just really, I feel like I got a little bit high rolled on that one, but obviously I don't want to say that too often because, player skill is important. It's not just high rolls. There's sometimes, people just draw the nuts. Then in round 5, I was up against the Lexi. This one went a bit more my way. I had a really, really substantial board with auras. I drew my ALS when I had 2 haze bendings on the board, so I was getting really good shield economy. And then Lexi switched to try and kill me, but unfortunately did not push through enough damage compared to my Otaraths and my shields that I kept generating. So I was able to take that win. And then my last round... I had 2 rounds left. So I then had a really, really good Starver game where unfortunately I only resolved 1 tome and I only hit 1 yellow aura. So I gained 6 life, but I only played a Genesis, so that was actually really bad for me. And then I didn't get another tome because when I had a tome of Fiendal in hand, I actually got Crippling Crushed, which meant that I couldn't actually play the tome, which was really frustrating. I couldn't get it into my arsenal. I had to pitch it and then I just didn't draw another tome, which was a real problem. So then the life totals just started to drip down, and I didn't have my tome healing, which I really needed. And we kind of ended up on 3-3. Now, it was 3-3. I had 3 haze bendings that are merciful in play, and I had a prismatic, and I think it was a prismatic, a card that blocked for 3, and, some other stuff in hand. So I was sitting in a situation where if he comes in, because of merciful, and we're both on 3 life, if he comes in, and he didn't have an arsenal, if he comes in with anything, let's say 9 attack or something like that, I can easily defend it and put 3 arcane on the board that's going to kill him. Or if he doesn't draw a fuse, because he was top decking to try and get a fuse that time. He didn't have Crown of Seeds. So we're in a very good situation, I think. And obviously I have those 3 haze bendings. So really what happened there, and he got the fuse, that's the first thing. And the second thing is that he also drew a Spinal Crush, so he could come in for 11. Now, between Tunic, Skullcap, Ironhide, and my block and my shields, I could block for a total of 8. So I had to take 3 damage, which obviously killed me before the merciful damage could resolve, which wasn't really ideal, everyone. So that's kind of where we ended up on that front. Now, let's just move on. So that's kind of my Starvo matchup. So that was very close, but that was a really good game and a really nice guy. So, it was kind of really fun to sort of play that. Now, if we're moving on to my final round of the day, this was actually a chain match, and I did fatigue, I would say, very, very well. So I really just kept the life total up. I played Tome of Fiendal. I had a Parable out at one point. I had a Passing Mirage. I had some Auras out. I had lots of defense reactions. I was blocking really well. And then I got the War Tune and Arsenal ready for Ursa perfectly on time. So, it was kind of like my health was I think I was at 33 going into Shackles 7. And then I already went down to 22 by Shackle 9, and then back up to 24, and then back down again, and I was jumping around a bit because of sigils. So it was really hard for him to put damage on the table, and I was just fatiguing him. And then on his big turn, I think I went down to 11. Yeah, on his big turn, I think he took me down to 11 from 24. So I kind of took 11 damage, even despite the fact everything he was throwing at me. And then I killed Ursa, but he only had 4 cards left in his deck and 3 cards left in his hand. So he really just started to fatigue out that point. I threw a few Auras Heralds at him when I had the chance, but actually I didn't need to. I just kept playing and blocking his cards, and he had to kind of, use the use the go again non-attack actions just to get sort of go again on the attacks. So that was kind of it. So I finished then 8-6. I would have liked to do better, for sure. The main thing that's actually annoying me is kind of what I talked about, and I'm going to do a video about sort of small mistakes that can happen when you're game playing later on. But the main thing that bothered me is just those little mistakes I made that were perfectly avoidable, and I didn't really, I didn't really deserve to make them, but I didn't really, do what I needed to do to stop them. So that was a bit frustrating. But that's all right. So let's just talk now. Let's just have a bit of a ramble about the calling in general. The event has been run pretty well. The Pro Tour went to time. The calling started 40 minutes late, but that's because Gem unfortunately broke during the event, which was a bit unfortunate. There have, however, been a lot of other sort of more issues with it. The first one is just, I think everyone knows about this, which is just about calling, attendance, registration and stuff. The calling sold out 2 days before the event. There was no sort of mention that it was going to sell out, or that there was a cap on the event before it did sell out. So people were a bit frustrated about that. There was no discussion on the webpage about the capacity of the hall only being 1,400 or 500 or something. And also, so people said they didn't really get an idea in advance that it could sell out because it hasn't been capped at other events before. I do kind of I don't necessarily have a huge amount of sympathy for people who, have a massive plan to drive here or have bought plane tickets and haven't just bought a calling ticket in advance. Just being honest, I've said the same thing to people, it's why didn't you buy one early? And people do have legitimate reasons, payday hasn't come yet. They have other expenses, and that is a bit unfortunate. And obviously, I'm I feel sorry for those people who literally couldn't buy a ticket earlier, but for the other people who just didn't buy one because they thought they could buy one on the day, I will say, if you're traveling 7-8+ hours to go to a tournament, you should definitely try and buy a ticket, especially if you're flying or anything like that. You should try and buy a ticket before it comes around. I think that's very important to do, and that'll be a lesson to a lot of people. Is you can't always assume that every venue is going to have enough space for everyone, and that's just the way it is. So don't. I don't want to dwell on negativity. Like, obviously, people should still be able to get in if they're there, but I think there are other problems to talk about just beyond that. So let's just talk about for a second that so you have all these calling tickets that were paid for but not collected, and people are buying them to get an extra Yorick or get an extra thing if you were in the Pro Tour, and you could get an extra Yorick and an extra tunic sleeves if you were in the Pro Tour. But I had a place registered for me because I was in the Pro Tour. There was a spare one. I also had a place registered to me from a Fabled ticket that I refunded yesterday. And I don't know if either of those two places were ever actually sold. So that's a bit of an odd one. And furthermore, they weren't actually selling a lot of extra tickets today, even that they just said they were sold out. So it's a bit odd, especially because, it would have been possible to pair round one, seat everyone, see how many people weren't there. And it does take about 20 or 30 minutes maybe to get people registered. But if you have a queue with the relevant information, you can get through them pretty quickly. So you could have sat everyone down, figured out which tables didn't have a player, dropped that player, and then registered and sold tickets to the extra 200 people waiting in a queue. And as long as you told people that was an option, you could have done first come, first serve for all those people and had a much bigger calling. And that would have been one option to get people in the door. Or just make sure people register online properly before just assuming they're there. And then if they don't register, drop them and let someone else sign up. The other thing, of course, that did bother a lot of people is that those people who came up and drove up and flew over and all those things were still there. They were still in the hall, and there was space for them to play side events. So really you have to ask, how is there space for them to play side events, but there isn't space for them to have a table at the calling? They're still using the same table. So really, I think it's a perfectly valid question to say, the calling could have just been bigger and you could have just run less side events. But of course, the booster drafts are $25 a head, and the single elimination, so lots of people who lose them have to then start another booster draft to keep playing. So you have this sort of situation where, it's a very good moneymaker to have booster drafts on demand going for Channel Fireball, but it's not necessarily the best thing for the game to not let as many people into the calling. It's just worth noting that 4 times 25 is, 8 times 25 is roughly 200 euro dollars, when a box of Tales Unlimited, which is what they're drafting through Channel Fireball's own website, costs about $65. So that's a pretty steep markup for a box of the Tales of Aria, right? Just to get it off the shelf. And it does feel like Channel Fireball are keeping the side events open to move a lot of their inventory compared to actually doing what is better for the community and selling more calling tickets. Speaking of what's better for the community, something that I've been discussing and I think is very relevant. This isn't me being greedy because I made day 2 of the Pro Tour and didn't make the top 64, but it does seem to me that Fab still has a long way to go and a lot to learn from the old FFG LCGs and things like that in terms of participation pricing. So let's talk about the drafts, and again, it's a good example of this. So the drafts are $25. You get no tickets for signing up. There are no participation prizes. If you lose, and they are single elimination. So if you lose round 1, you are out, and you can start another draft for another $25, or do whatever you want, but you get nothing. You don't get any tickets. You don't get anything. That to me just sounds really unfair. You're paying $25, which is above market, to draft Tales of Aria Unlimited, which is already super expensive. And if you lose one game, you don't get to play anymore in that draft, right? Which just seems like it punishes newer players and inexperienced players really badly, and just makes it a really unfun experience. And one of the guys who was telling me about this is a newer player himself. He's only been playing for 2 or 3 months. He said that after 2 or 3 drafts, he just didn't want to spend any more money to play Flesh and Blood and lose again, right? I think he played 2 drafts and he was like, I'm not going to pay for another one. I keep losing in round 1. Because if you think about it, it's single elimination, so half the people in your pod, like literally half, are going away with nothing except the packs that they paid 3 times market for, which isn't really great, right? I mean, it's really bad actually. And also that space that's being taken up by the on-demand drafts could have been assigned to people who want a ticket for the calling. You kind of have a bit of a sort of storm happening in terms of things going right and things going wrong. Now, let's pause for a second. Just logistically, the event has been run fine. Like, gem broke, whatever. Gem broke for a bit this morning for the calling because there were so many people trying to run a tournament on it. That's fine. That's not Channel Fireball. Everything else is fine. There's food. Everyone's being managed well. There's lots of people running around doing things they need to do. Announcements have been good. The tech is clear. The setup is good. There's loads of really positive things happening at the event. So I don't want people want to think I'm being negative. I'm drawing attention to specific things that the community has told me they have a problem with. I'm not necessarily, here to rain on the parade of everyone and, tell people how evil Channel Fireball is. We've already had that little bit of a rant about Monarch first edition pricing, but that's not necessarily the same arm that runs events. I think CFB Events is a whole other company. So, not company, but, subdivision, whatever. So, I think there is definitely friction there. So participation prizes are really important. And I feel like Flesh and Blood really needs to get on board with the participation prizes. So we're looking at a situation, right? So we've got those drafts which clearly just needed to give some ticks for showing up, not enough to make it worth buying the draft, dropping and buying another draft to get tickets, but certainly enough to make it worth going in and losing a game. But also it should just be tickets per win, and you should just, but like maybe 10 or something just for showing up. And it shouldn't be single elimination. Like if people want to drop, that's one thing, but it very much should just be Swiss for 3 games. And just call it. I mean, Swiss on a single A4 sheet of paper is really easy to do. There's no reason not to have Swiss on there as the option. So, it's really just a case of please do Swiss and let people play more than 1 game for their money, even if they're new and even if they're not the best player, right? It just seems unfair. So participation prizes though. So let's talk about the calling. Let's talk about the Pro Tour first. Just so making day 2. Being one of 175 people who made day 2, especially if you were 4 and 3, that means you can't really make the top 8. Even if you go full through, you probably still can't make the top 8. But you don't actually get anything for making day 2. Now, I'm not here to rag on the Pro Tour. The additional surprise prizes, we'll call them, of the playmat and the water bottle are great, but equally making day 2 is a bit of an achievement. And it would have been good for them to commemorate that with like a promo or something like that for everyone who made day 2, because there is that little patch between 64 and like 175 where you get just nothing for working really hard to stay relevant in that area. Now that's kind of fine. Like I'm fine with the person who wins getting shitloads of prizes, right? 25 grand, whatever, that's fine. I'm not here to suggest, like socialist pricing where everyone gets the same thing. I will say that if you look at LCGs and you look at the cost of printing a single promo card, it's not that high. Giving everyone who made day 2 of the calling the Pro Tour a card is a reasonably cheap gesture that successfully wins over, 80 to 90 high skilled players who just haven't done well that day and haven't made any higher enough to win a prize money. And I think that's just a really nice thing to give out. They did it at the Road to Nationals with the cold foil auras, and they should really just embrace that again. People should be getting participation prizes just for showing up. And yeah, obviously, if you do win, you get the much better stuff, but you still should get something just for participating. And it's the same problem in the calling as well. My friend played in the calling, and it's less XP than your local armory, which is ×3. Because the pool is harder, you don't get prize tickets for a win. So unless you make the top 8, I think at the calling, you don't get anything. So you're flying all the way here, or you're driving all the way here, coming to this event, paying your $99 to get an entry, and okay, you get a Yorick and you get some Fiendel sleeves, but you don't really get a huge amount. And you play in all of these rounds and you do somewhat okay, but not amazing, and you walk away kind of empty-handed without really justifying the money that you spent on the entry. And I feel like that's the position a lot of people were in. They kind of felt like the calling was, I'm not going to say a waste, because I feel like that's a bit too negative and I don't want to go there, but I feel like just certainly not worth what was put into it as a player in terms of coming here and what you get from it. So like, apparently everyone who went like more than 3 losses in the calling just dropped immediately, because there was no incentive to keep playing and there's no prizes on the line for them anymore. So again, I think there is an opportunity for Flesh and Blood, and I'm not saying that, you know, it should go this way, or that you know, I'm not in favor of like across the board prizing, but I do think that a participation promo, or a say like a day 2 promo for big events, is actually where we should be on this. I think that anyone who comes and plays should get something to take away, and even if they, you know, and they do average to medium well, they should get a little something extra. And obviously, if they do very, very good, they should get the amazing one. And also, one other thing that really is to be implemented for these kind of events is like a prize for the top person playing each hero. I think that's a really good way to get people invested in both the game and playing non-meta heroes, and I think that would be really, really appreciated by people who love those heroes. Imagine you get a Viserai promo if you were the highest placing Viserai, etc. That's something stolen from Legend of the Five Rings. So I think that would be really cool. So I think those are all just some ideas, but I think generally the sentiment I'm getting is that the calling was not made as big as it could be because side events still had to be run. Side events which cost a lot of money and didn't really give anything in return unless you won them. And, you know, that's a problem for the reasons of the fact that, you know, not everyone's going to win, but everyone is coming. And I think it is fine to fight over prizes. And I keep saying that, you know, I'm not going to come across as some sort of prizing socialist, but, you know, you kind of have to, you know, give something to people, or otherwise they're just not going to feel like their trip was worth it. Anyway, as you can all tell, I really wanted to record this update before I went to bed while the games were still fresh in my mind, but I am really, really tired. There will obviously be a Bonanza Pro Tour recap with photos and, you know, clips from the stream and all that kind of stuff happening as we sort of watch the games, which I haven't had a chance to watch yet. When I'm actually safely back home, I might do an update on the Battle Hardened tomorrow, but I don't, you know, I've talked for long enough now. There's definitely time to go to bed. So this is me closing off with this episode of Steel First Sleeps. As always, you know, if you like my content, there is a Patreon, which you can find linked in the description of many of my videos, probably in this one too, soon. And obviously, of course, you know, if you are at the PT New Jersey and you want to come and talk to me, I am usually wearing a black and red and gold t-shirt with the word Steel Fur on the back. I'll be wearing it again tomorrow, so feel free to see that, my Fiendel's Wayfarers t-shirt, and sort of come along and say hi. So yeah, I really can't keep my eyes open, so I'm definitely going to bed. Good night, everyone, and thanks for listening.